All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick are at 2024 preview and prediction for the West Virginia Mountaineers. Looking at this coaching staff: Neil Brown, 31-29 through 5 seasons. Chad Scott, he'll be his second year as offensive coordinator, fifth year on the staff, though. Shadon Brown and Jordan Leslie will share the defensive coordinator duties. And then, the biggest headline here really is Brown saved his job in late 2022 with some heroics. And that leads to a big 9-win season this past year. Kind of crazy how a couple of plays can really just define you being employed or not for the foreseeable future. So great job by Neil Brown. And it starts with an offense that was just tremendous. 31.5 points per game. Had some pretty good balance, but it was mainly a run game that was, putting up almost 230 per contest. You start with Garrett Green, a guy that I was always, kind of a fan of, at West Virginia. They did a lot of 2 QB stuff for a couple of years. Finally, this season, was able to be a full-time starter, and he proved to be one of the nation's best dual threats. A nice physical runner, throws with some nice pace downfield with power, has shown nice downfield touch. Needs to work on accuracy. Needs to continue to work on being a pocket passer as well, though. Garrett Green last year, I thought he played tremendously, Nick. 772 yards on the ground, 13 touchdowns, 16 scores through the air with only 4 picks, 264 yards per game total. This was a fun player to watch, and the sky seems to be the limit for him if he can work on some of those negatives.
I love Garrett Green. I think this is a player that's super excited. I was really excited to see him take that next step last year. Just want to touch on Neil Brown. A lot of people thought Neil Brown shouldn't return for 2023 after a disappointing 2022 where the team seemed to be kind of stagnant. They didn't seem to have a direction at all. I thought firing him was a bit premature, right? It doesn't really seem to be developing. They were making a lot of rash coaching changes down there in Morgantown. They kept him around. They ended up getting a 9-win season last year off some crazy things that happened. I think that was a good turnaround. I think they've brought in a solid recruiting class in the future, and they're also putting together a decent offense here, led by Green, who was really fun and phenomenal on the ground last year. 2,400 yards passing, 16 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, plus 772 yards rushing, 6.4 yards per carry, and 13 scores for him. The only concern with me, Green, completion percentage, right? 53.1% comp rate. Definitely concerning. The 4 picks, not too terrible at all, but the comp rate definitely worries me. He's a really good, true dual threat. People talk about him, maybe could be an underrated Heisman, a very, very underrated Heisman dark horse down there at the bottom if you want to throw some money in a guy. That's a bit of a long shot that something could develop for him. I think he's a really fun player. This offense was phenomenal on the ground last year, right? 4th in the nation with nearly 230 yards per game on the ground. And a lot of that does rely on Green being such a great dual threat quarterback.
You look at the running back room that's going to be paired up with him, C.J. Donaldson, a punishing physical player with good speed for his size, matched with patience at 238 pounds. You have a third-year player in Jalen Henderson who's going to back up Donaldson, and a breakout player in Jaheim White, who came out of nowhere over the final month of the year. A guy who showcased great speed and quickness, had some big plays in the receiving game. Was highly efficient at 5'9", 172. He had 146 November 4th against BYU in terms of total offense. And then against Cincinnati, he broke through for almost 300 total yards. And then, he had a $162 total against Baylor to round out the season. The final month of the year belonged to him, Nick, and now that gives them all of a sudden a phenomenal 1-2 punch. When you can rush for 204 yards at 10 yards per pop and then also have a 75-yard receiving touchdown in the same game like he did against the Bearcats, you have a special player on your hands.
This is a great offensive duo here that complements a really strong rushing quarterback that's a true dual threat. I really like what they have here. This is really solid, in my opinion. 2 really good players in Donaldson and White that are really solid guys that can take things forward for this team. White, 842 yards rushing last year, 7.7 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns, and you alluded to the 2 receiving touchdowns for him, and productive 25 yards per grab on his 5 catches. And C.J. Donaldson, I love him a lot. I think he's an incredibly underrated back, nearly 800 yards rushing last year, 4.7 yards per carry, and 11 scores. I think Donaldson was a guy I was really high on coming into last year, and he had a really phenomenal season, in my opinion, and returns, hoping to have another strong season. He's a really good player. White kind of burst on as a true freshman. I think he has a lot left in the tank as well with Green. This is a very fun rushing attack that's going to be really exciting to watch this year.
Looking at the wide receiver room, Traylon Ray and Hudson Clement were both breakout players as true freshmen last season. Both capable ex-pass catchers. Preston Fox finally saw the field and has versatility. Justin Robinson had over 90 targets the last 2 seasons for Mississippi State, but barely topped over 500 yards combined. Should be the Z receiver here. Jaden Bray, a pretty high upside player, didn't really work out at Oklahoma State, a guy who can play out wide. This team doesn't utilize the slot all that much, though. Tight end Cole Taylor, a good pass catcher, 6'7", 250, gets plenty of reps out of that position, though. Needs to develop as a blocker. This is a pretty sound receiving core. Taylor is going to be one of the better tight ends in the country, I would say, Nick. And, again, we talked about White being a breakout freshman. So these freshman receivers last year were pretty solid for them, and it seems like they can continue to explode as well after having some big plays and big moments a season ago.
Some really solid players returning here. 4 of your top 5 returning pass catchers coming back. Hudson Clement, 480 yards receiving, 21.8 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns. Cole Taylor, a really solid player that returns as well. A good prototypical tight end there. I like him a lot. 444 yards receiving, 12.7 yards per grab, 4 scores. Preston Fox, 368, 14.2, and 2 scores from him. Trayron Ray, 321 yards receiving, 17.8, and 3 scores for him. Rodney Gallagher returns as well, who was a bit of a back / red receiver as well. He was a versatile player. So a lot of depth here, a lot of different moves you can figure out with this offense. I like what they have here. A lot of productivity returning, a lot of depth for a team that scored a fair amount of points last year at 31.5.
Yeah, and Clement did have, against week 2, a big game against Duquesne for a big bold because of his production. 5 grabs for $177 and 3 scores, and had some nice games to round out the season back-to-back. So this is a guy who certainly showed out in spurts. A lot of excitement there. Look at the offensive line. One thing we praise West Virginia for each of the last 2 years was a good offensive line, and that shouldn't change this year. Wyatt Millum, considered one of the nation's top offensive linemen, was an elite left tackle, especially in pass protection, shows dominance and run blocking. Thomas Remack returns after a solid season at left guard. The loss of Zach Frazier is major at center, but Brandon Yates should be a more than adequate replacement after a good year at right guard. Does need to get better in run blocking, though. Jaquay Hubbard also saw 400-plus snaps at right guard, should now take over as the full-time starter. Also needs to showcase improvements on the ground. Nick Malone takes over right tackle from Doug Nestor, playing 100-plus snaps at both tackle spots last year. The offensive line loses 2 starters. Nestor and Frazier are their big ones, but they should have no issues here and will even improve, I think, on the offensive line. Obviously, when you have a ground game that was already splendid last year, Nick, when you have a guy like Millum at left tackle and some veterans across the board, the sky's the limit.
Millum's a really strong left tackle. This is a team that's been really good in the trenches. Neil Brown's unit has been able to put together a strong offensive line throughout his tenure. Millum, elite left tackle, one of the best in pass protection, really solid run blocking player, great on that blind side, a fantastic player to have. Thomas Remack as well at left guard, rounds out a really strong left side. Jaquan Hubbard and Nick Malone are 2 solid pieces on the right side. Then Brandon Yates is a good leader at center. I like this offensive line, a very physical, strong unit. Yes, you got to replace Zach Frazier at center, and that's where you have to plug in Yates, who, again, as a leader, doesn't have a whole lot of snap experience, but you have to replace Frazier. I think you can do that this year. This is a guy that's really solid. You plug him in there. This is going to be a great unit, one of the best in the Big 12.
They look at the verdict for this side of the ball. This offense will continue to be one of the best in FBS at running, with a great trio of runners and an impressive offensive line. The biggest question is how the passing attack do. What is the upside on that front? If they progress at a pretty normal rate, they should have very optimal balance, and I think they certainly will. This is going to be a phenomenal offense in this conference. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, this unit was one that also improved. It was kind of middle of the pack for the Mountaineers. They returned 6 starters, add 9 guys in the portal, lost 12. Look at the defensive line. They returned Sean Martin, who's been a quality player for a couple of years now. Same goes for Tyron Bradley. 2 seniors who will provide some good leadership. 2 vet transfers will be behind them, and Ty French, who was a good player for Gardner Webb. And then TJ Jackson coming over from Troy, who was a pretty elite run defender and has shown some flashes as a pass rusher as well. On the interior defensive line, Fatorma Mulba was a good defender in 2023 at 6'3", 305. Edward Versteren from Finland was impressive as well at 284 pounds. Rotationist Hammond Russell wasn't all that bad in his near 100 snaps. Azani Redwood was respectable as well, but the return of basically the entire D-line here is big news for the Mountaineers, Nick. They certainly don't have that one standout player, at least right now, but they do have some veterans you can probably count on. Obviously, Mike Lockhart was great for them. He departs. Other than that, though, everyone's pretty much back, so you're going to have some nice balance in terms of leadership and experience. What do you make of this defensive line that will never probably be great, but they can certainly win you a lot of games?
There are some solid pieces here. There's nothing that jumps off the screen at you. Some guys that do work hard and put together some solid stats. Sean Martin's a guy I look at as a good leader coming off that edge. 27 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 1 sack for him last year. Want to see him get those numbers up, certainly. Fatama Mubala, 25 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a half a sack for him. Again, I want to see him get that production upward potentially. Edward Vegetarian, 28 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Nice production returning there. A good player on this defensive line. Russell Hammond as well is a decent rotational piece with 10 total tackles for him last year. Can he find a way to get some more appearances this year? I've seen Redwood as well as another guy that is hoping to get some more snaps this year. Not an incredible unit by any stretch of the imagination. They certainly don't have a incredibly deep defensive line here, but they add some transfers. They plug in some different pieces. I think it's not a bad unit at all.
Looking in the middle of this defense, pretty young linebacking group here. Josiah Trotter, a physically imposing player that didn't see the field a year ago, should slot right in at inside linebacker due to his high school experience. Trey Latham, gained some good reps in 5 games before a leg injury. Certainly needs to get better versus the run. And being a more consistent tackler, though, Ben Cutter played a lot, but was no good in his true freshman campaign. Reed Carrico transferred from Ohio State. Not much in terms of playing time for them, though. Pretty weak room. I think there's a good bit of upside here because of all that youth. But this is a big concern for me, Nick. You're looking at 2 guys who've not been in the program very long as the potential starters, and behind them, it's not any better.
This is certainly a concerning part of this defense, right? You look at 2 guys in Latham and Trotter who didn't play a whole lot last year for this team. Trotter didn't really play at all, and Latham only played 5 games, 27 total tackles for him. I'm worried about this linebacking core, right? You have a lot of some big shoes to fill with Lee Kapogba leaving, who was a really strong player for this team, their top tackler. Now the linebacking core looks a lot weaker. I'm concerned about the depth on it as well. This is certainly a unit you got to keep your eye on.
Now you look to the secondary. CB room has some transfers that should be impactful. Garnett Hollins was an elite run defender from Northwestern, showed improvements in coverage as well. Aiden Garnes was a good player for Duquesne, especially in coverage. Dantes Fagan was a pretty quality start at Charlotte and will contend for lots of time. TJ Crandall was solid in his few games for Colorado State. Lots of transfers in this room. Safety room also features a wave of newcomers. They do return Aubrey Burks, though. He's one of the nation's best at his position. Missed a lot of tackles, needs to be better in that area. Certainly didn't have the most elite season last year from Burks, but this is certainly a guy you could certainly count on. You look at some of the guys around him. Anthony Wilson only played a few games last year, now battles with another impressive Northwestern transfer in Jaheim Joseph. Josiah Jackson's a redshirt freshman, and then 3 true freshmen behind them. So very young room. Secondary should be a strength. They do lose an elite playmaker in Beanie Bishop, though, Nick. That's certainly going to be a loss. This is a guy who was the 3rd leading tackler, had 4 picks and a whopping 20 pass breakups. So losing that production is certainly not ideal. Another part of the defense we're kind of concerned about. A lot of transfers here, though, so I think that kind of tells you they're not all that confident in a lot of these guys they do return.
Some concerns here. I forgot to mention Ben Cutter at linebacker, 56 total tackles last year. As a rotational player, a younger guy with 6 total tackles for loss as well. Anthony Wilson in the secondary, he's your best returning asset. 80 total tackles for him, 5 pass breakups and a pick. Audrey Burks is a solid player, 47 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups, 2 picks for him. Caden Beiser, Trinan Bradley also had 23 and 22 total tackles respectively. Bradley had a pick and a pass breakup. Jacoby Spells had 8 tackles and rotational pieces. Losing Beanie Bishop is a big loss. He was such a talented player, and that 20 pass breakups is very tough to replace. They add in a couple transfers here and there, some highly rated freshmen coming out of this recruiting class as well. Hope to get some playing time. The secondary struggled at times last year, 86 in the nation, 237 pass yards per game given up. I'm a little concerned about the secondary, a little concerned at times about this defense, but I do think they have some solid pieces that can potentially step up and perform.
Looking at the verdict for this defense, Mountaineers D was a competitive one last year and played very good ball to end the year over the last 3 games. D-line is veterans and some good portal adds that should allow them to improve. Well, it's nothing but transfers really in the secondary alongside an elite returning in Burks. Middle of the defense, though, was a big concern for me. More dynamic run games could give them big problems. So I certainly think that's something to watch with West Virginia. Look at that prediction. Neil Brown's done a great job, putting himself not only, off the hot seat, but into contention to maybe even win the Big 12. I think this is certainly a schedule that's very favorable for them. I like the offense with the balance they're going to have this year. Offensive line will be great. I certainly think Garrett Green's a good player, but I don't think he's the most high-end passer, and I think that could certainly hurt them against some of the tougher defenses where the run game slows down a bit. And I think the defense will, again, be, I'd like to use the word competitive. I think the secondary is going to allow some big plays from time to time, and I definitely think they'll struggle against the run against some of the better opponents like Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Iowa State, UCF. Even though I have them winning a couple of those games at home against UCF, against the Wildcats, Nick. I have them winning those ones. Even Cincinnati will be a tough ground game. And those are wins right now, but they could easily flip to losses if that defense certainly does regress. I think that's a concern for me. 8-4, 9-3 for you, Nick, with a big upset win over Penn State. Something I certainly flirted with doing. Might even pull the trigger. I think with that game being as early as it is on the day, though, it's going to be hard for me to pull the, in Morgantown. Is going to be favorable for them, though. Penn State, I think, will win that game. You're going to go ahead and pick the upset. If they can do that, they're going to start the year in the top 25.
I'm going to pick the upset here. I think they're going to beat Penn State week 1 at home. That place is going to be rocking. This is a big home game for West Virginia. Yes, it's a bit defeating that the game's at noon. That does kill a little bit. If it was under the lights, I think you feel a little bit better about it. But this team, they kept it close with Penn State last year. I forget if it was a backdoor cover on the last play by Penn State or whatever it was. It was very close. They were very close to covering the spread. The spread was not that too large of a difference last year, and West Virginia was able to be competitive, in Happy Valley, a tough place to play against the Nittany Lions at that stadium, at Beaver Stadium. So I think that bodes well for this team. Garrett Green, I love this quarterback. I think it's super exciting. I love this offense. They'll be able to run the ball very efficiently. They're going to run the ball a whole lot this year, ground and pound, throw the ball when they need to. I think this offense is phenomenal. I'm excited to see what they can do this year. A lot of fun to watch, certainly. When you look at the defense, the defense won't be on the field a whole lot, I don't think, based off the way that they're going to run this offense, which will be solid to keep the defense off the field. This defense is a bit of a weak point for this team, but I do think they're serviceable and have some solid pieces. I think 9-3 right now for this team. I think they're going to lose those tough games at Arizona, at Oklahoma State, and versus Iowa State at home, but those games could certainly go either way for this team. I think this team is part of that upper echelon of this conference of teams that are competing, trying to fight their way to the Big 12 title game. I like what Neil Brown is doing here. I think he's finally figured it out and set this team on the right course after, trying to avoid being fired for what felt like forever since he joined this team. They're heading in the right direction, in my opinion. They're building a strong culture in Morgantown. The offense is fun to watch. Certainly tune in and watch this team this year.
Yeah, I think exciting is the right word to use. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch this year. I think at least 80% of their games are going to be one-score games, a win or a loss. They're going to play a lot of close games, I think, this year, Nick. Don't see them necessarily blowing out too many people, and I don't think they're going to get blown out either. So this will be a really fun team to watch. Certainly want to tune in to see them play for a majority of this season. That's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. As always, appreciate you joining me breaking down the Mountaineers, capping off the Big 12 of a team that can certainly win the conference as underdogs and also make a major statement against Penn State week 1 like you're envisioning.
A very fun team. I'm looking forward to that first week game against Penn State. Can't wait to tune in and check out how that game goes.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.